It doesn't start with a feeling. It starts with a hollowing out, a silence where there used to be noise, an emptiness in the chest that has a shape, a weight. For Michael, it was the shape of his father's old chair, the one that sat empty in the living room. The weight was the phone in his hand, the one he could no longer use to call him. He was a good man, by the world's standards. He paid his taxes. He held doors open. He remembered his wife's birthday. He provided. He built a life, a good life, from the outside looking in. A wife, Sarah, whose eyes had started to hold a quiet, unspoken concern. A daughter, Lily, 7 years old, who still believed her father could fix anything. But he couldn't fix the hollowing out. He tried. Oh, how he tried. He tried self-help books that promised a new man in 30 days. He tried pouring himself into his work until the blue light of his screen was the last thing he saw at night, branding the silence on his retinas. He tried the gentle, numbing pull of a glass of whiskey in the evening, a temporary fog that lifted to reveal the same landscape, only colder. He was a man standing on the shore of his own life, watching the tide go out, and he could feel the grit between his toes, the chilling air, and he knew, with a certainty that was bone deep, that he had nothing left inside him to call it back. One Tuesday evening, the silence was louder than usual. Sarah was putting Lily to bed. The house was a tomb. He found himself standing in the doorway of his father's old study, a room he mostly kept closed. It smelled of dust and old paper. And on the desk, where it had always been, was the Bible. His father's Bible. The leather was cracked, the gilding on the edges worn away from 1,000 thumbings. It was an artifact from another world, a world of simple, sturdy faith, a world Michael had left behind for the complex, sophisticated world of doubt and reason. He didn't open it. Not then. He just looked at it. It was a monument to something he'd lost, or maybe to something he'd never truly had. His phone buzzed in his pocket. A work email. A problem to solve. He closed the study door, turning his back on the old book, and walked back into the noiseless silence of his modern life. But the image of it stayed with him, a splinter in his mind. A few nights later, he broke. It was nothing dramatic. There was no screaming, no tears. Lily had asked him a question about heaven, about whether her grandfather could see her dance recital. And Michael, the fixer, the solver, the man of logic, had nothing to give her but a hollow, I don't know, sweetheart. The look in her eyes. Not disappointment. Just acceptance. Acceptance that Daddy didn't have the answers. It was a small dagger, twisted gently. That night, after the house was asleep, he went back to the study. He didn't turn on the main light, just the small, green-shaded lamp on the desk. He sat in his father's old chair, the leather side under his weight. He opened the Bible. It fell open to a specific page, the spine cracked there from years of use. The book of James. And his eyes fell on a verse, a line his father had underlined in faint blue ink. You do not have because you do not ask. The words were simple, almost childishly so, but they hit him with the force of a physical blow. They bypassed his intellect, his cynicism, his years of accumulated defense mechanisms. They went straight to the hollow place. You do not have because you do not ask. What was it he didn't have? Peace, purpose. The ability to feel something, anything beyond a low-grade, constant dread. The capacity to be the husband Sarah needed, the father Lily deserved. He had been asking the world. He had been asking himself. He had been asking the bottom of a glass. But he had never asked. It felt foolish, speaking into the silence. A grown man, in a dark room, talking to no one. He closed the book. The hollow feeling was still there. But now, there was a tiny, almost imperceptible fissure in it. A sliver of light. A question. What if? What if he asked? The asking began the next day. It was clumsy, awkward, a silent, mental whisper during his commute. Help! Nothing happened. The traffic was still bad. The work emails were still demanding. The hollow feeling remained. He kept at it. It became a strange, secret discipline. In the shower. Help me. Staring at his computer screen. Give me patience. Lying in bed next to his sleeping wife. Let me feel something. It felt like throwing pebbles into a bottomless well. He never heard a splash. He started reading the Bible, not as a literary exercise, but with a desperate, hungry curiosity. He started in the Gospels. The figure of Jesus was different from the stained glass icon he remembered from childhood. This man was compelling, unsettling, real. His words were like fire. They burned away the religious platitudes Michael had grown up with. He read about the Holy Spirit, the Comforter, the Advocate, the Spirit of Truth. This was a confusing concept. A ghost? A force? An idea? One night, he read Jesus' words to his disciples in the book of John. And I will ask the Father, and he will give you another advocate to be with you forever. This is the Spirit of truth. You know him because he abides with you, and he will be in you. He will be in you. The phrase echoed. It suggested a presence, an interior reality, not a theological concept to be debated, but a person to be known. This is where the conflict truly began. Not a conflict with the outside world, but a civil war within his own mind. His rational intellect, the part of him that had built a successful career, rebelled. This was nonsense. Superstition, a psychological crutch for the weak. You're creating a narrative to explain a chemical imbalance in your brain. The voice of reason, his voice, whispered, "You're grieving. You're stressed. This is a coping mechanism. There is no spirit. There is only you in a room, talking to yourself." It was a powerful argument. It was on the surface sane, but the hollow place in his chest argued back, not with words, but with its very existence. It testified to an absence that all his reason, all his success, all his worldly efforts could not fill. He felt like two men. The old Michael, who knew how the world worked, who trusted only in what he could see and measure and control, and a potential new Michael, a frightening, unknown creature of faith who was being asked to trust in the unseen, the unprovable. The battlefield was his daily life. Sarah noticed the change. "You've been quiet, Mike. Spending a lot of time in the study." He tried to explain. It came out in a jumble. "I've just been reading Dad's old Bible, trying to figure some things out." Her face was a mixture of hope and caution. "Okay, that's good, I guess. Just don't get lost in there." He was already lost. He tried to pray, really pray, not just the desperate, one-word whispers. He tried to ask for the Holy Spirit, as the Bible seemed to suggest he should. It felt like the most absurd thing he had ever done. He knelt by his bed, feeling like an imposter. The words stuck in his throat. "God, I asked for your spirit. I asked to be changed." Silence. He waited. He strained his spiritual ears. He looked for a feeling, a sign, a warmth in his chest, a voice, anything, nothing, just the sound of the furnace kicking on downstairs, just the weight of his own disappointment. He stood up, his knees cracking. A 40-year-old man, on his knees, begging for a ghost. Shame washed over him. This was pathetic. The conflict raged for weeks. A cycle of desperate seeking, followed by crushing silence, followed by the mocking voice of his own rationality. He was a ghost hunter, chasing a rumor, and all he was finding was more of his own emptiness. He read about the fruit of the Spirit in Galatians: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. He conducted a brutal inventory of his own life. Love? He felt a duty toward his family, a deep fondness, but was buried under layers of stress and distraction. Joy? A foreign country he hadn't visited in years. Peace? A ceasefire at best. Patience? Thin, brittle, snapping daily. Kindness? A performance. Goodness? He was morally adequate. Faithfulness? To what? Gentleness? He was often gruff, hurried. Self-control? He was controlled by his moods, his deadlines, his anxieties. The list was a mirror, and it showed him a man who was spiritually barren. One afternoon, his frustration peaked. He was in the study, the Bible open before him. He felt like Jacob wrestling with the angel, but he was just wrestling with himself, and he was losing. He spoke aloud, his voice tight with anger and despair. "What is the point? I am asking. I'm reading. I'm trying. And there's nothing. Is this a game? Are you there or not?" The silence that answered felt different this time. It wasn't a passive absence. It felt like a presence, a profound, listening stillness. It was a silence that could hear him. And in that silence, a new thought arose, not from his own mind, it seemed, but placed there gently, like a key on a table. You are asking for an experience, a feeling. You're treating me like a force to be harnessed. I'm not a force. I'm a person. You cannot conquer me. You can only surrender to me. Surrender. The word terrified him. Surrender meant giving up control. It meant admitting that the old Michael, with all his reason and his effort, was not enough. It meant dying to that man. He thought of Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. Not my will, but yours be done. The ultimate surrender. That was the heart of the conflict. His will versus another will. His kingdom versus another kingdom. He left the study that night, not with an answer, but with a clearer understanding of the question. It wasn't about receiving a power-up. It was about a transfer of authority. It was about a throne and who was sitting on it. The war was no longer about facts and feelings. It was about sovereignty. The breaking point came on a perfectly ordinary Thursday. A major project at work was on the verge of collapse. A client was furious. Michael's boss had been on the warpath all day. He came home late, his head pounding, the hollow place in his chest now a cavern of pure stress. He walked into a minor domestic crisis. Lily had spilled a giant glass of red juice on the new light beige living room carpet. Sarah was on her hands and knees, scrubbing frantically, her face flushed with frustration. The room smelled sharply of vinegar and desperation. Michael, finally, I've been calling you. Look at this. It's everywhere. Lily was crying in the corner, a small ball of guilt and shame. The old Michael took over. The stressed, logical, problem-solving Michael. His voice came out like a whip crack. Sarah, why would you give her red juice in here? On the new carpet? For God's sake. Sarah froze, looking up at him, her eyes wide with hurt. Don't you dare blame me for this. Where were you? I needed help. I was trying to save our goddamn livelihood, he roared. The moment the words left his mouth, he felt the wrongness of them, the ugliness. But he was in it now. The pressure of the day, the weeks of spiritual frustration, the feeling of being utterly failed by God, all of it erupted. Lily wailed a high, terrified sound. Sarah stood up, her hands stained red. Get out, she whispered, her voice trembling with rage. Just get out of this room. I can't even look at you right now. He stood there, a monster in his own home. The hollow man, now filled with nothing but poison. He turned and stormed out, not to the study, but out the back door, into the cool evening air. He paced the small patio, his fists clenched, his heart hammering against his ribs. He was the problem. He was the source of the anger, the stress, the unhappiness. All his seeking, all his asking, had been a worthless fantasy. He was unchanged. He was worse than unchanged. He looked up at the sky, a deep, indifferent purple. The first stars were coming out, and he broke, not with a shout, but with a whimper. All the fight went out of him. The anger dissolved, leaving only a vast, desolate wasteland of failure. He sank onto the cold concrete step, put his head in his hands, and wept. It was the first real, unforced emotion he'd felt in months, and it was the crushing weight of his own bankruptcy. He had nothing, no answers, no strength, no right to be the man of this house. He was a shell. And in that moment of total, absolute zero, the asking stopped. The striving ceased. There were no more words, no more theological debates in his mind. There was only a raw, exposed need. It was no longer a prayer. It was a surrender, a single, silent, internal cry from the very depths of the hollow place. I can't do this. I am nothing. If you are there, you have to take over. I surrender. I give up. My will, my life, it's yours. I have nothing left to give. He expected nothing. He was past expectation. This was simply the end of the road. But then something happened. It didn't come as a feeling. It didn't come as a voice. It came as a presence. It was as if the hollow place inside him, the very void he had been fighting, was suddenly filled. Not with an emotion, not with an idea, but with a substantive, tangible reality. A deep, resonant, quiet stillness that entered the core of his being. It was like a key turning in a lock he never knew existed. A door, deep inside him, swung open, and with it came a knowing, not a thought, but a knowledge imparted directly to his spirit. He knew, with a certainty that surpassed all rational understanding, that he was not alone, that the Spirit was here. Now, in him, it was not an explosion. It was an arrival. The grief and shame did not magically vanish, but they were now held within this profound, unshakable peace. They were no longer the ocean he was drowning in. They were waves on the surface of a deep, still ocean floor. He sat there for a long time, just resting in this new, impossible reality. The struggle was over. The war was lost, and in losing it, he had won everything. After a while, he stood up. His body felt the same. The world was the same. The red juice stain was still on the carpet. His work problems were still waiting. But everything was different, because he was different. He walked back inside. The house was quiet. Sarah was in the kitchen, leaning against the counter, staring out the window, her arms crossed. Lily was nowhere to be seen, probably sent to her room. Sarah didn't look at him. "I'm sorry I yelled," she said, her voice flat, exhausted. Michael walked over to her. He didn't speak. He just put his arms around her. She stiffened at first, expecting another fight. But then she felt it. The difference. It wasn't in his words. It was in his presence. The frantic, stressed energy that usually crackled around him was gone, replaced by a profound calm. She relaxed into his embrace, confused. "Michael!" He held her tighter. "No, I'm sorry," he said, his voice quiet, grounded. "I was a jerk. The carpet doesn't matter. You and Lily matter. I love you." The words were simple. He'd said them before. But this time, they carried a weight, a sincerity that came from a source deeper than his own emotional reserves. They were infused with a love that was not his own. She pulled back and looked into his eyes. She saw the same man, but the eyes were different. The frantic, haunted look was gone. There was a light there, a peace. "What happened?" she whispered. He shook his head, a small, wondering smile touching his lips. "I stopped trying," he said, and he started. The change was not instantaneous perfection. It was a reorientation. The Holy Spirit, Michael learned, was not a magic wand that banished all problems. He was a compass, a guide, a source. The next morning, the work crisis was still there. But as Michael sat at his desk, facing the barrage of angry emails, he did something new. He paused. He closed his eyes for a moment. He didn't frantically ask for wisdom. He simply acknowledged the presence within him. "You are here. I yield to you." And a quiet confidence arose, not in his own ability to fix it, but in the guidance of the one who was with him. He started making calls. His voice was calm, patient. He listened. He found solutions he'd been too panicked to see before. The crisis began to de-escalate, not because of a miracle, but because he was being led, step by step, by a peace that surpassed his own understanding. Patience, a fruit he had so lacked, began to manifest, not as a forced effort, but as a natural outflow. When Lily was slow to put on her shoes, instead of the internal sigh of frustration, there was a gentle, internal nudge. She is a gift. This moment is a gift. And he would kneel down and help her, his heart full of a tenderness that felt new. With Sarah, the change was even more profound. He began to listen, truly listen, not just waiting for his turn to talk, but seeking to understand her heart. The spirit within him seemed to illuminate her words, helping him hear the meaning behind them. Their conversations deepened. The quiet concern in her eyes was replaced by a dawning joy, a rekindled love. He was still Michael. He still had his personality, his sense of humor, his quirks. But the core of him, the throne room of his heart, had a new occupant. The old Michael, the one who had to control everything, who lived by his own strength and wit, had died in that moment of surrender on the back steps. The new Michael was simply a vessel, a conduit, for a life that was not his own. He kept reading the Bible, but now was different. The words were alive. They breathed. The spirit within him was illuminating the text, making it a personal conversation. He wasn't just reading about God. He was hearing from God. He learned that the Spirit's primary role was not to give him spiritual goosebumps, but to conform him to the image of Christ. to produce that fruit: love, joy, peace, patience. And he saw it happening not through his own grim determination, but as a natural, organic growth, like a tree planted by streams of water. The joy was the most surprising thing. It wasn't happiness, which was dependent on circumstances. It was a deep undercurrent of gladness, a conviction that no matter what was happening on the surface, all was ultimately well because he was held, loved, and led. He found himself humming, smiling for no reason, playing with Lily on the floor with a lightness he hadn't felt since he was a child himself. One evening, a few months later, he was back in the study. The same Bible was open on the same desk. The same shaft of light fell across it. He wasn't seeking anymore. He was abiding. Sarah came to the doorway, leaning against the frame, watching him. "You look at home in here now," she said softly. He looked up and smiled. "I am." She came in and sat on the edge of the desk, running her fingers over the worn leather of the Bible. "I don't understand at all," she said. "But whatever it is, I want it to." So he told her, not as an expert, not as a theologian, but as a witness. He told her about the hollowing out, the desperate asking, the futile striving, the roaring conflict, and the glorious, quiet surrender on the back steps. He told her it wasn't about religion. It was about relationship. It wasn't about following rules. It was about following a person. It wasn't about trying harder. It was about yielding completely. He took her hands. "It starts when you..."